So it looks like we're getting 1 command point a turn. It's going to cost you command points to run additional detachments, and now big horde units might be able to cut down units that are trying to get away from them. The reveals for 9th edition just keep on coming. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we've been covering all the details of the new rules from 9th edition as they come out. After Games Workshop showed us a pretty hefty amount of reveals yesterday, they've now come back to reveal us yet more details of how the new command point system is going to be working. Plus previewed a new fun stratagem that seems like it's going to be available to all, but is mainly going to help out hordes, which to be honest I'm not too against, because hordes have been having a bit of a rough time for it so far with these previews. Let's start with a look at those command points then. So the biggest news today I'd say are exactly how command points are going to be generated and the fact that battalions cost command points. The latest Warhammer community article started out with this little chart showing you how many command points you got for various different sizes of game. It's not so different from the one yesterday, but this one actually includes the in-between points limits, stating that combat patrol is up to 500 points, incursion is up to 1000, strike force is up to 2000, and onslaught is up to 3. It also gives us power level equivalents for those things, which I found kind of interesting, as typically power levels tend to equate to around about 20 points, yet here they're being used as 10 points instead, so I'm not really entirely sure what they're going for there. It looks like a strike force game for points could be vastly smaller than a strike force game for power level, which I found kind of interesting. In any case, from these starting command points, depending on what you're using, it looks like detachments are going to be costing command points rather than generating them. Now this is entirely flipped on its head from 8th edition. So now the incentive is rather than spamming battalions, it's going to be trying to fit as much as possible inside one of them. The article states that their core detachments that include your warlord will be absolutely free, so provided you're using a patrol, a battalion or a brigade detachment, then they will generate you as many command points as they cost you, so they won't cost you anything. That means for armies that can just field one battalion at 2000 points, they're going to be the ones that get the maximal amount of CP. Now I think that this is definitely going to ruffle some feathers, just because it's going to be turning the game on its head, but I honestly think that this could be an interesting idea for list building. Basically what they've done is sort of heavily incentivize people to stick to the standard force organisation charts back from 5th edition and give you a command point reward if you are doing that. I think what they have in mind in terms of game design is, say at a 2000 point game, a lot of armies will want to fork out for an extra battalion or detachment to be able to run more units, maybe meaning that you run as a force of maybe like 9 or 10 command points depending on what the other detachments cost. I'd honestly see this as more of a reward to the armies that manage to stick within one battalion, or even sticking within the one brigade, meaning that they'll get access to more command points than a similar force would if it was spamming detachments. Now this honestly has all kinds of implications for the game. Firstly, you're going to be less incentivized to take multiple detachments and field things in different allied chapters. In 8th edition you're heavily incentivized to, say, if you had a bunch of Thunderfire cannons for Space Marines, there's a pretty decent incentive to make them in their own separate detachment with their own chapter tactics that do better for them, say using Imperial Fist chapter tactics for that detachment, and making the rest of your army have chapter tactics that are better suited to, say, melee for example, option that's now disincentivized, as still costs you command points rather than generating them. In general I think it's also going to discourage spam. It means if you want a ton of heavy support choices, then you're likely going to have to fork out for an additional spearhead. I'm sure in plenty of games that might be perfectly reasonable and the thing that you want to do, and it could be well worth paying the command point cost, but if you just want to use a ton of the same force organisation slot, then in general you are going to have to pay some CP. In terms of troops choices, it kind of encourages for you to have at least some troops choices to fill out this initial battalion or brigade, but at the same time also limits you from wanting to take absolutely tons of them. Say for example if you were playing Imperial Guard and you wanted as many infantry squads in the army as possible, the new system looks like it's going to be penalising that, as it means that if you need to buy in an extra 2 battalions, presumably at 3 command points cost each, then you're going to be starting a 2000 point game at only 6 CP rather than 12. So basically maximal reward is going to be at something like 3 to 6 troops choices, and after that they're going to become a bit more of a liability, at least costing you more command points than they're gaining. I'm not sure I necessarily see this as a particularly bad thing, as it's kind of limiting spam even of them. Other than that, this battalion detachment looks largely the same as the ones that we're used to, mandatory 2 HQs and 3 troops, with options for plenty of amounts more, although they have tweaked the dedicated transports option slightly. Now you can only take dedicated transports for each infantry unit taken in the army, although bear in mind that characters are often infantry as well, so you still will be able to spam these quite efficiently. They're just no longer completely unrestricted, like just feel free to include 3 Razorbacks even if you've only got tanks in the detachment or something like that. A tiny bit harder to access them, but not really all that meaningfully in my opinion. They still don't even need to be able to transport said infantry unit, say as taking Razorbacks in an army that has only Primaris Marines otherwise. I think that the new system's certainly going to take a bit of getting used to. I think it will slightly encourage unit diversity and maybe taking other choices that you might not necessarily have gone for straight away. For armies like Guard, I think that we might start seeing more brigades again, allowing you to get 12 troops choices and a bunch of the other slots, as it means that it won't cost you any command points at the start of the game. I personally think they've done at least a reasonably good job here. They seem to be encouraging people to use the old style force organisation slot and rewarding people for that, or still basically allowing you to run pretty much any list that you want, whether that's an all-tank army list of just spearheads, or any other random formation that you might like to play, though you'll likely be paying a slight command point penalty for this. And bear in mind though, if you are basically running all tanks and just taking 2 spearheads and nothing else, then you'll still be starting with 6 command points, which is more than you might have had in the last edition. On the whole, I think I'm a fan of this new system, although of course we'll have to see what it promotes when the community gets hold of all the rules and we start making lists. Next up we have a discussion of the command phase, and we have a little rules excerpt briefly summarising it. Basically, if your army is battle-forged, then at the start of your command phase, you gain 1 command point, which is called your battle-forged CP bonus. To me, this implies that it's the command phase on your turn, but I guess we're not 100% sure of that. Both players might get a command phase at the start of every turn for all we know. I'd guess though that it's probably just going to be once a turn, which would mean that you'd have a steady trickle of command points through the game, so basically on top of your starting 12, which might have got a little bit depleted via taking detachments, you could expect maybe 17 or 18 by the end of the game, depending on how long it goes on. It doesn't appear that there's any further restrictions on those command points, such as having your warlord present on the table, or any other random things like that. It just sounds like they keep on trucking no matter how beaten up your army gets. I think that this seems like a pretty reasonable change to me. Basically it'll mean that you'll have more command points available for later game stratagems, and prevents you from blowing absolutely all of them in the first turn or two to try and gain big advantages. It means that you'll pretty much never be able to counter your opponent out from using certain problematic stratagems, even when their command points are heavily depleted. They also state that there'll be certain abilities found on datasheets and some stratagems that are used in your command phase, and some missions may have rules that take place there. I'd hope for things like chaplain listeners to be resolved here. I guess we'll have to wait and see. It's good to have an entire phase to think about doing those sort of abilities though, rather than just having to remember them at the start of a battle round or the start of a turn. To my knowledge, I don't believe that this will have any effect on the other command point generating abilities, such as refunding command points for stratagems, although apparently according to their live stream today, that will still be very much locked to 1 command point per battle round, as it has been in the max play rules for a while now. We've also seen previewed a new universal stratagem called Cut Them Down, which looks like it's going to be available to everybody, but it looks like it's also going to be far more useful on horde armies compared with more elite ones. Basically this command point costs 1 command point, and it's a penalty to enemy units falling back from large units. When an enemy decides to fall back before any models are moved, you roll 1d6 for each model in the army that's within engagement range of that enemy unit. For each result of a 6, that enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound. Now we don't know exactly how close engagement range is going to be. It's an entirely new set of wording that's going to be applicable to the combat phase, and it's kind of important to know for just how many models are going to be able to do this rule. If it's just, say, within 1 inch of enemy models, as it might be in the current edition, it's likely to be at least a little bit underwhelming. But if it, say, is any models within 1 inch and then any models within 1 inch of those, then you could be getting quite a lot of models in combat with the enemy doing this rule. Naturally, the more models that we're going to have in this engagement range, the more mortal wounds that could be generated, and it could actually make it a pretty tough choice with whether or not to fall back from certain horde units, say a unit of tactical marines trying to retreat from an on-running mob of orc boys. If the stars aligned from the orcs and they maybe had 20 of their models within an engagement range, then this could be 1 command point to deal 3 mortal wounds to those space marines, obviously depending on how you roll. I think it's a little bit of a shame that it doesn't take any account of how good the unit is in close combat against said units. This cut them down option sounds like it's going to be just as good when you're using it on Gretchen or Brimstone Horrors as it is if you're going to be retreating from Space Marine Assault Centurions or Khorne Blood Crushers, so it means that the little guys are going to get far more bonus out of this than the big guys are. However, I do think that it's quite helpful that it's going to be a lot faster to do than an Overwatch type mechanic. I could have easily seen this rule being implemented. Each of those models may make attacks and only hit on 6s, to be able to do a proportion of their damage to the enemy unit. This would have taken a lot longer to resolve, to be honest, particularly on big units, and it would be a lot of dice rolling for not much effect. This one may be a bit less balanced than that, but it is also a ton quicker, which is a positive. I think it could have niche uses, even for more elite armies though. Say if you manage to injure a character pretty badly and they've only got 1 or 2 wounds left. If he retreats away from a 5 model squad, then it might well still be worth having a go at this just to try and cut them down and stop them doing any of their other powerful abilities for the rest of that turn. It's pretty cool that they've included another core stratagem in the game. I don't know how many more we'll be getting like this. Apparently the ones for auto-passing morale, command rerolls, and interrupting in combat will all be staying around according to their live stream today, but it begs the question if we're going to be getting a few more like this. I'll certainly be interested to know what engagement range means as well. It might be some interesting new wording to do with the fight phase. Finally, I just thought I'd mention a couple of things that they've clarified in various live streams on Twitch this week. Somebody on the Discord mentioned that they'd heard how many missions are going to be playable at the various different levels. As they did say, they'd written missions for each level of match play, so it looks like there's going to be quite a lot of missions in the new 9th rulebook. Apparently there's 4 missions aimed at 500 points level, 6 for 1000, 6 for 2000, and 4 for 3000. They certainly could be very similar or might have modest tweaks to them, but I do think it's pretty appropriate to have slightly different rules at least compared with a 500 point game to a full 2000 point game. It will be interesting to see what that entails. Another thing that people mentioned in yesterday's video was that I kind of skimmed over the new actions that can be done, as they're kind of a new mechanic within 40k. It sounds like quite a few of these new missions will revolve around certain units doing actions, which we don't know the full rules on yet, but it sounds very much like they're going to be foregoing shooting and assault to be able to score victory points in the mission. We saw an example in this 4 Pillars mission that they previewed yesterday, where a unit can do an action to siphon power, and it sounds like they'll have to choose between doing that or maybe shooting or assaulting. It's not something that we've generally had to choose between in the core game before, so I think this could incentivise having a few more units of chaff grunts about in the army, or perhaps some cheap buffing characters around, so just so they can stand around and score these actions, as opposed to wasting more valuable units doing that. Unless they have their own bespoke special rules though, I think this could be really problematic if you're trying to run, say, a pure Knights army list or something. You really can't afford to have an entire Imperial Knight just stand around on an objective for a turn, without moving, shooting or assaulting, otherwise you're just going to be at a massive disadvantage in the game. For all we know though, they could just be only used in secondary missions, so you could just pick different secondaries if you are playing Knights. So let me know what you think of the reveals today. They're certainly giving us quite a lot to think about in 9th edition, and between all of these command point changes and different rules for fielding and using armies in game, I think it's going to be a very different experience. On the whole, I largely like what I'm seeing so far. I'm glad they're incentivising the use of at least some troops in an army, and getting a little bonus to Horde Melee is certainly no bad thing in my opinion. I'll certainly be covering any more 9th edition news as it comes out, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more, as well as the regular tactics content that comes out on the channel. If you're thinking of buying any models in the near future and you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention my affiliate links which are down in the description below. There's an Element Games one for the UK, where basically if you click on that one and make an order, then Element Games saves you typically 10 to 20% on 40k products. And also if you order after clicking the link, then a small amount of the money goes to support the channel, as well as costing you no extra at the time. So it can be a way to support the channel on models that you are going to order in anyway. For the USA and Canada, I do also have a similar link for that. That one's for Amazon, which does stock pretty much all of Games Workshop's products, so if you wanted to order stuff in from them, then that'd be another way to help support the channel. It does work on any Amazon products at all though, not just models, so if you click the link and made a purchase in the next 24 hours, you will be helping support the channel. A big thank you to all of you guys who have been doing that. It certainly helps justify all the time spent making videos on model soldiers. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.